The incident. Jack's boots crunched softly against the alien soil as he scanned the vast, uncharted landscape. The planet, designated XR-12 by the exploration team, was a world of strange, towering plants and an eerie red sky. Alone, with only his portable scanner and a worn-out communicator, Jack ventured further from his ship. His mission was simple: gather data on the environment. But the air carried a heaviness, a sense of being watched that he couldn't shake. The ground trembled slightly, almost as if the planet itself was alive. Jack paused, his heart racing. He adjusted the scanner, hoping it was just a malfunction. The readings were off the charts. Energy levels spiked and fluctuated wildly. Before he could process it, the ground beneath him gave way. A roar, deep and guttural, echoed through the air as Jack fell. He tumbled into darkness, the world spinning until he landed with a sickening thud on something soft and sticky. Disoriented, he groaned, his head pounding. He flicked on his wrist light and froze. The walls around him pulsated, glowing faintly with a sickly green hue. They weren't stone or dirt. They were alive. Veins throbbed in patterns across the surface, and the air was thick with humidity and an odd organic smell. He realized with a sinking feeling that he was inside something massive. He scrambled to his feet, his boots squelching against the fleshy floor. His communicator crackled as he tried to contact his ship. "Explorer 1, do you copy? I need an immediate extraction." His voice was steady despite the panic clawing at his chest. Static. Nothing. "Damn it," Jack muttered, slamming the device against his palm. The faint sound of movement made him stop. He held his breath, straining to hear. There it was again, a soft shuffling, like something dragging itself across the floor. "Hello," he called out, gripping the small knife from his belt. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The shuffling grew louder, closer. Jack's light flickered, casting eerie shadows against the walls. Then, from the darkness, a figure emerged. At first, Jack thought it was another explorer, but as the figure stepped closer, his jaw tightened. She was humanoid but distinctly alien. Her skin shimmered with a faint blue light, and her large, dark eyes seemed to pierce right through him. She was small, barely reaching his chest, and her movements were cautious, like a wild animal assessing a threat. She wore a tattered jumpsuit, and in her hands she held a strange device that hummed softly. Jack tightened his grip on the knife. "Who? What are you?" The alien girl tilted her head, her expression unreadable. She opened her mouth, and to Jack's surprise, she spoke, haltingly, in broken English. "You? Human. Like me. Trapped." Jack lowered the knife slightly, but didn't let his guard down. "Trapped? Inside what?" She gestured around them, her movements quick and sharp. "Big. Beast. It eats. We. Food." The words sent a chill down Jack's spine. He looked around again, noticing for the first time the faint outline of bones embedded in the walls. Human bones, alien bones, remnants of those who hadn't escaped. His stomach churned. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "Days," she replied, her voice laced with exhaustion. "Many days." Jack took a step back, his mind racing. The creature they were inside was alive, and it was keeping them here for a reason. He had to find a way out. He glanced at the alien girl again. She seemed frail, but had survived longer than he had been here. She knew more about this place. Whether he liked it or not, she might be his only chance. "Do you know a way out?" he asked, his tone urgent. The girl hesitated, her dark eyes narrowing. "Maybe. Dangerous." "Dangerous is better than sitting here waiting to be digested," Jack said, his voice firm. He extended a hand toward her. "We work together. Deal?" She studied him for a moment before nodding. "Deal." The uneasy alliance formed. The two began moving cautiously through the creature's insides. The walls shifted occasionally, as though the beast was aware of their presence. Each step was a test of nerves, with Jack constantly glancing over his shoulder. The faint growls and distant echoes made his skin crawl. Suddenly, the floor beneath them trembled violently. The alien girl grabbed his arm, pulling him back just as a section of the ground opened, revealing a pit of glowing green liquid. Jack's heart raced as he stared into the acid, realizing how close he'd come to falling in. "You saved me," he said, breathless. She gave a small nod. "Now, you save me later." Jack managed a weak smile. Fair enough. As they continued, the realization hit him. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was now responsible for hers as well. Together, they ventured deeper into the living maze, the tension thick with every step. And though he didn't fully trust her yet, one thing was clear. If they didn't stick together, neither of them would survive. The unlikely ally, Jack and the alien girl, moved through the shifting tunnels of the massive creature, their uneasy silence broken only by the occasional squelch of the organic floor beneath their boots. The air felt thick, warm, and suffocating, carrying a faint, sour smell that made Jack's stomach churn. He kept glancing at the alien girl, unsure of what to make of her. "Name?" she suddenly asked, her voice soft but firm. "Jack," he replied. "You?" "Rilke," she said, her gaze steady as if daring him to challenge her existence. Jack nodded, filing away her name as another fragment of the surreal reality he'd fallen into. They didn't speak again for a while, focusing instead on navigating the maze-like interior of the beast. Every wall seemed to shift as they approached, the fleshy structure almost alive with intention. Jack's gut told him the creature was aware of them, and was actively working to keep them trapped. "How do you know this place?" Jack finally asked, breaking the silence. Rilke hesitated, then gestured with her strange device toward a nearby wall. Embedded in the pulsating flesh was what looked like a skeletal hand, partially dissolved but still recognizable. Jack froze. "Others," she said simply, her voice tinged with sorrow. "Before us." It hit Jack like a punch to the gut. This creature had trapped others, consumed them slowly, and now it was their turn. He forced himself to keep moving, pushing down the rising panic. "Why didn't it eat you yet?" he asked, glancing at her. "Or me?" Rilke's eyes darkened. "It plays. Keeps some alive. Maybe, for a long time." The thought was horrifying, but it gave Jack a glimmer of hope. If the creature wasn't in a rush to digest them, they had time to figure out a way out. He just had to trust Rilke, whether he liked it or not. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the tunnel, vibrating the walls around them. Jack's instincts kicked in as he grabbed Rilke's arm and pulled her behind a cluster of fleshy protrusions. The growling grew louder, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of something dragging itself across the floor. "What is that?" Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. "Hunter," Rilke hissed. "Beast, inside beast." Jack didn't have time to ask for details. A grotesque creature slithered into view, its elongated body covered in slimy, chitinous plates. It moved with an unnatural jerking rhythm, its many eyes scanning the tunnel with a cold, predatory focus. Jack held his breath, gripping his knife tightly, though he doubted it would do much good against something so massive. Rilke slowly raised her device, her fingers moving over its alien controls. The hum grew louder, and a faint blue light pulsed from the device. Jack stared, torn between curiosity and terror as the light grew brighter. Before he could ask what she was doing, Rilke aimed the device at the creature and released a sharp, high-pitched sound. The hunter recoiled, screeching in pain. It thrashed wildly, its body slamming into the walls and causing the entire tunnel to shake. Rilke grabbed Jack's hand and yanked him into a side passage as the creature flailed behind them. "Move," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Jack didn't need to be told twice. They ran, dodging shifting walls and acidic pools as the tunnel seemed to collapse around them. The sound of the hunter's screeches faded into the distance, but Jack's heart didn't slow down. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, he turned to Rilke. his chest heaving. "What was that?" he demanded. "And what is that thing you're holding?" Rilke held up the device, her expression calm but guarded. "Tool. From my world. Scarce. Beasts." Jack frowned. "You had that the whole time. Why didn't you use it earlier?" Rilke tilted her head, her gaze almost amused. "You think easy to use. One shot. Now must charge. Lucky it worked." Jack sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Great, so now we're defenseless again." She shrugged. "Better than dead." He couldn't argue with that. For the first time since he'd met her, Jack allowed himself a small, grudging sense of respect for Rilke. She might have been alien, but she was resourceful. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling him everything. As they pressed on, Jack began to notice more signs of the creature's sinister nature. Bones and other remains were embedded in the walls, some still faintly glowing as if the creature had absorbed their energy. The air grew colder, and the tunnels became narrower, forcing them to crawl through some sections. At one point, Jack paused to catch his breath, his muscles burning from the effort. Rilke sat beside him, her face unreadable. "You don't trust me," she said suddenly. Jack blinked, caught off guard. "Should I?" She smirked faintly, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "No, but you need me." Jack opened his mouth to argue, but he couldn't. She was right. As much as he hated relying on someone he barely knew, she'd saved his life twice already. If he wanted to get out of this nightmare, he had no choice but to trust her, at least for now. "Fine," he said, "but don't think I'm not watching you." Rilke's smirk widened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stood and motioned for him to follow. "Come. Beast won't wait." As they ventured deeper into the creature, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was just beginning, and that whatever awaited them ahead would test their fragile alliance to its breaking point. The creature's secrets. The tunnel stretched endlessly before them, twisting and shifting as if alive. Jack and Rilke moved cautiously, their steps measured. The organic walls pulsed faintly, illuminated by veins of bioluminescent light that cast an eerie glow. Every so often, the structure shifted, as though the beast was breathing, its massive body alive with subtle movement. Jack was beginning to understand why the creature felt like a trap. Its insides weren't just organic. They were engineered, designed to confuse and disorient. He couldn't help but wonder who, or what, had created something so vast and intelligent. "What is this thing?" he asked, breaking the silence. "You seem to know more than you're letting on." Rilke hesitated. Her glowing eyes scanned the walls, her alien features unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "Not just animal. Not natural." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You're saying it was made?" She nodded. "Long ago. My people tell stories. Of builders. They make things. Like this." "Builders?" Jack frowned. "Who were they?" Rilke's gaze darkened. "Gone. Dead. But their creations still live." The idea sent a chill down Jack's spine. If this creature was a creation of some ancient advanced civilization, what purpose had it been designed for? He didn't have to ask, though. Rilke seemed to sense his thoughts. "It is a fortress," she said. "A weapon." Jack stopped, staring at her. "A weapon? For what?" "To keep intruders out, or trap them in," she replied, her tone grim. The revelation hung between them like a heavy weight. Jack tried to wrap his head around it. This wasn't just some random alien life form. It was a deliberate construct, designed to be an inescapable prison. As they continued, they stumbled upon what looked like a mural embedded in the walls. The surface was smoother here, less organic, and strange symbols were etched into the glowing veins. Rilke approached it cautiously, her fingers tracing the markings. "What is this?" Jack asked, stepping closer. "History," Rilke said, "of the beast." The mural told a story, though it was fragmented and alien in its presentation. Jack could make out depictions of towering, godlike beings surrounded by smaller figures, perhaps slaves or worshippers. The central image showed one of these beings crafting a massive serpentine creature, the beast they were trapped inside. Rilke pointed to the final section of the mural. It showed the creature devouring entire planets, leaving destruction in its wake. Jack's stomach turned. This thing was made to destroy planets. No, Rilke corrected, to protect them. But it changed. Changed how? She shook her head. Not sure. Maybe time. Maybe something else. It became alive. The idea was terrifying. The builders had created something so powerful that it developed a mind of its own, turning against its purpose. Jack felt a pang of helplessness. How could they hope to escape something this ancient and intelligent? Can it be killed? He asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Rilke hesitated. Maybe, but not by us. Jack clenched his fists. He hated feeling powerless, but he pushed the frustration aside. Then we focus on escaping. Rilke didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the mural. Her expression was unreadable, but Jack sensed she wasn't as confident as she pretended to be. Suddenly, the walls around them shuddered violently. The creature let out a low, rumbling growl that echoed through the tunnel, making the floor quake. Jack stumbled, catching himself against the wall. "What's happening?" he shouted. Rilke's face was pale, her voice sharp. "It knows we are here." The creature seemed to shift in response to her words. The tunnel narrowed around them, forcing them to crouch as the walls pulsed aggressively. The air grew colder, and the bioluminescent veins flickered like dying lights. Jack's chest tightened. "It's trying to crush us." "Move," Rilke yelled, grabbing his arm. They scrambled through the tightening passage, the walls closing in on them like a vice. Jack's heart pounded as he crawled on hands and knees, the fleshy floor squelching beneath him. The growl grew louder, more insistent, and he could feel the vibrations in his bones. Just when it seemed the tunnel would close completely, they burst into a larger chamber. Jack collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, while Rilke scanned the room with her glowing device. The chamber was massive, its walls lined with strange, crystalline structures that pulsed with light. "What is this place?" Jack asked, still catching his breath. Rilke's device beeped softly, and her expression shifted to one of awe and fear. "Core." Jack's eyes widened. "The core of the creature." She nodded. "Its heart." The realization hit Jack like a freight train. They were standing in the most vital part of the beast, the place where its life force was concentrated. The walls seemed to shimmer with energy, the crystals pulsating in rhythm with the creature's distant heartbeat. "Can we use this to escape?" he asked, his mind racing. Rilke frowned, her gaze fixed on the crystals. "Maybe. But dangerous." "How dangerous?" "Touch wrong one." She mimed an explosion. Boom. Jack swallowed hard. Great. They were standing in the middle of a living time bomb. Still, if the core was the key to escaping, they didn't have a choice. He glanced at Rilke. "You said it was alive. Can we talk to it? Reason with it?" Rilke hesitated. "I can try, but it may not listen." Jack didn't like the sound of that, but it wasn't like they had better options. "Do it." Rilke stepped forward, her device glowing brighter as she approached the crystals. Jack watched nervously, every muscle in his body tensed. The creature's growls seemed to vibrate through the chamber, a low, menacing sound that made his skin crawl. "Be ready," Rilke said without turning around. "For what?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rilke didn't answer. She placed the device against one of the largest crystals, and the chamber erupted with light. The walls seemed to come alive, the veins pulsing furiously as the creature let out a deafening roar. Jack covered his ears, his heart pounding as the beast's presence seemed to engulf them. And then, a voice, a deep alien rumble that resonated in his mind. Why do you disturb me? Jack froze. The creature was speaking, and it sounded angry. Very angry. The growing bond. Jack and Rilke pressed on through the beast's living maze, their uneasy alliance growing stronger with each passing moment. The pulsating walls seemed to hum with the creature's awareness, shifting and twisting as if trying to outwit them. The bioluminescent veins cast faint, flickering light over their tired faces, making the shadows around them feel alive. Jack wiped the sweat from his brow, his movements slow and deliberate. He could feel the weight of exhaustion settling in, but he refused to let it show. Rilke, on the other hand, moved with a quiet determination, her glowing eyes scanning every corner for traps or signs of danger. "What's the plan?" Jack asked, breaking the tense silence. "Keep wandering until we find another death pit." Rilke shot him a glance, her expression unreadable. "No plan. Just survive." Jack huffed, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "That's comforting." "You complain too much," Rilke said, her tone sharp. "But you still alive. That means I do something right." Jack wanted to argue, but she wasn't wrong. Her quick thinking and strange alien technology had saved him more than once. Still, he hated feeling like a tag-along, dependent on someone he barely knew. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Jack asked, his voice softer this time. Rilke hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Not like this," she said quietly. "But I survive things." The vulnerability in her voice caught Jack off guard. For the first time, he saw her not as a mysterious alien with secrets, but as someone who had been through hell and back. He decided to let the topic drop, sensing it was a wound she wasn't ready to open. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the occasional squelch of the floor beneath their boots. The air grew colder, and the faint sound of dripping liquid echoed around them. Jack couldn't tell if it was water or something far worse. "I'm curious," Jack said after a while. "Why did your people tell stories about this thing? Did they send you here on purpose?" Rilke flinched, her fingers tightening around her device. "My people. They reject me," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Say I am broken." Jack frowned. "Broken? How?" She gestured to her glowing skin and sharp features. "Not like them. Different. Weak. They send me away. Prove I am strong, or die." Jack felt a pang of anger on her behalf. He knew what it was like to be cast aside, treated as less than. "Sounds like they're the broken ones," he muttered. Rilke glanced at him, her expression softening. "You understand." "More than you'd think," Jack replied, his tone grim. He didn't elaborate, and Rilke didn't push. But in that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them, a fragile thread connecting two strangers with more in common than they realized. Their moment of connection was short-lived. The walls around them began to tremble, and the floor shifted beneath their feet. Jack staggered, catching himself against the pulsating wall. "What now?" he growled, his knife already in hand. Rilke's device beeped frantically, her expression darkening. "Something coming." The sound of chittering filled the air, growing louder by the second. Jack's pulse quickened as he scanned the darkness, his grip tightening on the knife. The first creature emerged from the shadows, its many legs clicking against the floor. It was small, about the size of a dog, but its sharp, insect-like body and glowing eyes made it clear it wasn't friendly. "Run," Jack suggested, already backing away. "Too late," Rilke said grimly. More of the creatures poured out of the walls, their numbers growing rapidly. Jack counted at least a dozen before he stopped trying. His heart pounded as they circled, their movements coordinated like a pack of predators. Rilke raised her device, the blue light flaring to life. She pressed a button, and a high-pitched sound erupted from the device, making Jack wince. The creatures screeched in response, recoiling briefly, but they didn't flee. "Not scared this time," Rilke muttered, her voice tense. "Great," Jack said, gripping his knife tightly. "Any other tricks up your sleeve?" She didn't answer, her focus on the advancing creatures. Jack knew they couldn't fight them all, not without better weapons. His mind raced, searching for a way out. Then he saw it, a narrow tunnel on the other side of the chamber, partially hidden by the shadows. "There!" he shouted, pointing. Rilke glanced at the tunnel and nodded. "Go." They sprinted toward the opening, dodging the snapping jaws and razor-sharp legs of the creatures. Jack felt one of them graze his arm, tearing his sleeve and leaving a shallow cut. He gritted his teeth against the pain, focusing on the tunnel ahead. Rilke reached it first, sliding inside and holding out her hand to Jack. He grabbed it, letting her pull him through just as the creatures lunged. The walls of the tunnel closed behind them, sealing off the chamber with a sickening squelch. They collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. Jack's arm throbbed, but he ignored it, turning to Rilke. "You okay?" She nodded, though her face was pale. "You?" "I'll live," Jack said, glancing at the torn fabric of his sleeve. "Barely." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their close call settling in. Finally, Rilke spoke. "You fight well." Jack snorted. Didn't feel like it. "You survive," she said simply. "That is enough." Jack looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. He didn't say it, but he was beginning to realize just how much he needed her, and how much she might need him too. Their bond, forged in the belly of a living nightmare, was growing stronger with every step they took. And though the path ahead was still uncertain, one thing was clear. They were no longer just allies. They were partners in survival, bound by the unshakable resolve to make it out of the beast alive. The core's revelation. The tunnel grew narrower as Jack and Rilke pressed on, their path lit only by the faint glow of the bioluminescent veins running through the walls. The rhythmic hum of the creature's heartbeat grew louder with every step, an omnipresent reminder that they were inside something alive, something ancient and terrifying. Jack's muscles ached, his steps heavy, but he pushed forward. He glanced at Rilke, who seemed equally drained but determined. Her glowing skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, making her look otherworldly, like a phantom guiding him through the beast's living maze. "We're getting close, aren't we?" Jack asked, his voice low. Rilke nodded, her glowing eyes scanning the shifting walls. "Core is near. Can feel it." The air grew colder as they continued, the walls pulsating more erratically. Jack's unease deepened. The creature knew they were coming. It could feel them, just as they could feel it. Whatever lay ahead, it wasn't going to let them reach it easily. The tunnel abruptly opened into a massive chamber, and both of them stopped in their tracks. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight before him. The core of the beast was unlike anything he had imagined. The chamber was vast, its walls lined with massive crystalline structures that pulsed with a shifting spectrum of colors: blue, green, and violet. At the center of the chamber, suspended by sinewy tendrils, was a massive pulsating sphere. It glowed faintly, each throb sending waves of energy rippling through the air. The walls themselves seemed alive, undulating as if breathing. "What is this?" Jack whispered, unable to tear his eyes away. "The heart," Rilke said, her voice reverent and tinged with fear. "Where it lives, where it thinks." Jack's skin crawled. "It thinks." Rilke nodded. "Alive, not just body, mind." Jack wasn't sure what was worse, the idea of being trapped inside a mindless, predatory creature or one that was intelligent and aware of them. He stepped forward cautiously, his eyes scanning the chamber for any sign of danger. "Can we use this to escape?" he asked. Rilke hesitated, her gaze fixed on the pulsating sphere. "Maybe, but not easy. Core controls everything. If we break it, the whole thing could collapse," Jack finished, understanding her hesitation. She nodded. "Or it kills us." Jack grimaced. "Great. So, no pressure." Before either of them could act, The air around them shifted. The walls began to shimmer, and Jack felt a sudden, overwhelming presence in his mind. It wasn't a voice, not exactly, but a series of emotions and images that flooded his thoughts. Anger, pain, hunger. The creature was speaking to them. "You feel it?" Jack asked, clutching his head. Rilke nodded, her face pale. "It knows we are here." The pulsating sphere flared brighter, and Jack staggered as the presence grew stronger, pressing into his mind like a vice. Images flashed before his eyes. Planets being consumed, entire civilizations reduced to ruins, and finally, the builders themselves. He saw their towering forms, their advanced technology, and their ultimate failure as their creation turned against them. "It's showing us," Jack gasped. "It's history." Rilke's expression hardened. "No, not showing. Warning." The presence shifted again, and this time, the creature's intent was clear. It wasn't just a predator, it was a prisoner of its own design. Created to protect, it had evolved into something else entirely, a being of rage and despair, trapped in a cycle of destruction it could no longer control. "We need to leave," Jack said, his voice shaking. "Now." Rilke didn't argue. She raised her device, the blue light flaring to life as she scanned the core. Jack watched as she manipulated the controls, her movements precise but tense. The walls trembled, and the pulsating sphere grew brighter, its energy becoming almost blinding. "What are you doing?" Jack asked, shielding his eyes. "Finding weakness," Rilke replied. "If we overload core, it lets us go. Or it kills us," Jack reminded her. She gave him a sharp look. "We have no choice." Before Jack could respond, the chamber erupted in chaos. The walls split open, and tendrils of flesh shot toward them, writhing and snapping like living whips. Jack dove out of the way, narrowly avoiding one that slammed into the ground where he had been standing. "Watch out," he shouted, pulling Rilke aside as another tendril lashed toward her. The creature was defending itself, its desperation palpable. Jack gritted his teeth, his knife useless against the monstrous tendrils. He focused on keeping them at bay, while Rilke continued her work, her device emitting a high-pitched hum that seemed to agitate the core even further. "Hurry up," Jack yelled, dodging another tendril. "Almost there," Rilke shouted back, her fingers flying over the device's controls. The core flared one last time, and the tendrils froze midair. The entire chamber shuddered violently, and Jack felt the ground beneath him lurch. Rilke grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the tunnel they had entered from. "Run," she yelled. They sprinted back the way they had come, the walls collapsing around them as the creature thrashed in agony. Jack could feel its presence fading, its hold on his mind weakening. The bioluminescent veins flickered and dimmed, the once pulsing energy of the creature now erratic and chaotic. Just as they reached the tunnel's exit, a deafening roar filled the air, and the ground beneath them gave way. Jack grabbed Rilke's hand, pulling her up as they scrambled to safety. They emerged into another chamber, smaller and quieter, the sounds of the creatures thrashing distant but still audible. For a moment, they simply lay there, gasping for breath. Jack turned to Rilke, his voice hoarse. "Did it work?" She nodded, though her expression was grim. "It's weakened, but not dead." Jack sat up, his mind racing. The creature wasn't finished with them yet, but they had struck a blow, a small victory in a battle that was far from over. The final plan. The chamber was eerily quiet now, save for the distant echoes of the creature's pained groans. The pulsating walls had slowed, their light dimming to a faint glow. Jack and Rilke leaned against the cool, damp surface, catching their breath. Both knew the reprieve wouldn't last long. "We can't stay here," Jack said, his voice steady despite the lingering adrenaline. "It's hurt, but it's not dead. We've just made it angrier." Rilke nodded, her sharp features shadowed by the faint bioluminescence around them. "We must finish it, before it heals." Jack frowned, wiping the streak of grime from his face. Finish it. We barely made it out alive. What's the plan? Walk back into the core and try our luck again. Rilke shook her head, the faint hum of her alien device filling the silence as she adjusted its settings. Core too strong. But it has weak points. Nervous system. We overload it. Jack's brow furrowed. Overload its nervous system. How? She gestured to the device in her hands. This, if I amplify signal, strong enough to break connections. But it will be loud. Loud how? Jack asked, narrowing his eyes. Rilke hesitated. Painful. For it. And us. Jack sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Great. So, not only do we have to survive the thing trying to kill us, but now we have to deal with a weapon that might fry our brains in the process. It will work, Rilke said firmly. But we must reach right place. High risk. Jack met her gaze, seeing the determination there. She believed in her plan, even if the odds were slim. And what other choice did they have? Stay here and wait to be digested. He let out a deep breath. All right. What do you need me to do? Rilke's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. Help me get there. Protect me. Jack smirked. That's all. Easy. The humor was short-lived as the creature's groans turned into a deep, rumbling growl that shook the chamber. The walls shifted, and Jack felt the temperature drop sharply. The creature was regaining its strength, and it knew exactly where they were. We need to move, Rilke said, already on her feet. Jack grabbed his knife and followed her, his muscles tense. The maze-like tunnel stretched ahead, dark and foreboding. Every step felt like walking into the jaws of a trap, but they pressed on, navigating the shifting pathways with growing urgency. As they ventured deeper, the beast's resistance became more aggressive. The walls themselves seemed to come alive, sprouting fleshy tendrils that lashed out at them. Jack slashed at one that wrapped around his ankle, the blade slicing through the pulsing flesh with a sickening squelch. This thing really doesn't want us here, Jack muttered, panting as they dodged another tendril. Rilke's device emitted a sharp beep, and she pointed ahead. There, path to nerve center. Jack squinted, seeing a narrow, shimmering passage that seemed to glow faintly. The air around it crackled with energy, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Let me guess, Jack said. That's going to be the hardest place to reach. Rilke gave him a look that was half apology, half determination. Yes, but no choice. They pushed forward, the creature's defenses becoming more relentless with every step. Acidic pools bubbled in their path, forcing them to leap across precarious ledges. Hallucinations began to flicker at the edges of Jack's vision. Visions of Earth, his home, and the faces of people he had long lost. He shook his head, trying to focus, but the images were painfully vivid. It's in my head, Jack growled, clutching his temples. How do I block it out? Rilke grabbed his hand, her touch grounding him. Focus. It lies. It wants you to stop. Her words cut through the haze, and Jack pushed forward, forcing himself to ignore the illusions. Together, they reached the shimmering passage, its walls buzzing with energy. The air was thick, making it hard to breathe, but they pressed on, knowing they were close. Finally, they entered a chamber unlike any they had seen before. It was smaller than the core, but the walls were lined with glowing, thread-like structures that pulsed in unison. The nerve center. Jack could feel the raw energy radiating from the room, the creature's very essence concentrated here. Rilke stepped forward, her device glowing brightly. This is it. I overload signal here. But it will wake up. Jack tightened his grip on his knife, his jaw set. Let it wake up. We'll be ready. Rilke gave him a brief nod, then began adjusting the device. The hum grew louder, and the air seemed to vibrate with tension. Jack stood guard, his eyes scanning the chamber for any sign of movement. The creature didn't keep them waiting. The walls trembled violently, and tendrils shot out from every direction, faster and more aggressive than before. Jack moved on instinct, slashing and dodging as Rilke worked frantically. The device's hum grew deafening, the light from it blinding. "Hurry," Jack shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Almost done." Rilke yelled back, her fingers flying over the controls. The tendrils closed in, one wrapping around Jack's arm and yanking him off his feet. He gritted his teeth, stabbing at it until it released him. He hit the ground hard, but he didn't stop, lunging back into the fray to protect Rilke. "Now," she screamed, slamming her hand down on the device. A wave of energy exploded from the device, filling the chamber with a piercing, high-pitched sound. Jack fell to his knees, clutching his head as the sound reverberated through his skull. The creature's roar filled the air, a deafening cry of pain and rage. The nerve center's glowing threads began to rupture, sparking and fizzing as the energy overwhelmed them. The entire chamber shook violently, and Jack knew they had seconds before it all came crashing down. "Go!" Rilke shouted, grabbing Jack's arm and pulling him toward the exit. They sprinted through the collapsing tunnels, the walls crumbling around them. Jack's lungs burned, his legs screaming in protest, but he didn't stop. Behind them, the creature's cries grew fainter, its strength waning. Finally, they burst into open air, collapsing onto the ground outside the beast's body. Jack rolled onto his back, staring up at the alien sky as he gasped for breath. Rilke sat beside him, her expression exhausted but triumphant. "We did it." Jack let out a shaky laugh. "Yeah, we did." But as they stared at the massive, writhing form of the creature in the distance, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that their battle with it wasn't truly over. The escape. The alien sky stretched endlessly above them, painted with hues of violet and crimson, but Jack had no time to admire it. The ground beneath him trembled, the distant groans of the beast growing weaker yet somehow more desperate. Its massive form loomed in the distance, thrashing in agony, its once impenetrable aura fading into vulnerability. Jack sat up, his breaths ragged, and glanced at Rilke. She was crouched nearby, her glowing skin dimmer now, her alien device flickering with faint, sporadic pulses. Her eyes remained fixed on the dying creature, her expression unreadable. "Is it done?" Jack asked, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Rilke shook her head slowly, her gaze unwavering. "Not yet. It is weak, but not dead." Jack groaned, pushing himself to his feet. His body ached with every movement, but he forced himself to stand tall. "We don't have time to stick around and find out if it's going to recover. We need to get far away. Now." Rilke hesitated, her fingers brushing over the device. "It can recover. If it does, it will hunt us. Then we need to finish it," Jack said, though the words tasted like ash in his mouth. He was spent, his energy reserves drained to their core, but he knew they couldn't leave the job half done. "How do we end this thing for good?" Rilke stood, her glowing eyes meeting his. "The heart. One final strike. But it is dangerous." "Dangerous is all we've known since we got here," Jack replied, gripping his knife tightly. "What's one more risk?" Rilke nodded, her expression resolute. "We overloaded completely. No recovery. But we must go back." Jack winced. "Back inside. Fantastic. Let's just hope it's too weak to kill us before we kill it." They didn't waste time. The creature's thrashing had created an opening in its massive body, a gaping wound that oozed bioluminescent liquid. The entrance looked like the maw of a dying leviathan, dark and foreboding. Jack's stomach churned as he and Rilke approached it. "Remind me why this is a good idea," Jack muttered, his grip on his knife tightening. "Not good idea," Rilke said simply. "Necessary." Jack chuckled dryly. "You're a real optimist, you know that." The air grew heavier as they stepped back into the beast's body, the organic walls pulsating weakly around them. The once constant hum of the creature's life force was now faint, almost pitiful, but the oppressive sense of being watched remained. As they ventured deeper, the familiar tunnel seemed more erratic, less structured. The creature was losing control, its defenses faltering. Acidic pools had spread into wide rivers, and jagged bone-like structures jutted out from the walls, creating treacherous obstacles. Rilke led the way, her alien device glowing faintly as she scanned their path. "Heart is this way. Close." Jack followed closely, his senses on high alert. Despite the creature's weakened state, he knew it could still lash out at any moment. Every step felt like walking into a trap, but they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. Finally, they reached the core chamber. It looked different now, dimmer, less vibrant. The massive, pulsating sphere at its center was cracked, its glow flickering like a dying flame. The tendrils that had once defended it hung limp, twitching weakly. "It's vulnerable," Jack said, his voice tinged with both relief and unease. "But it still looks like it could tear us apart if we're not careful." Rilke stepped forward, her device emitting a high-pitched hum as she approached the core. "We overload it here. Once done, we run." Jack nodded, gripping his knife. "Let's do it." Rilke began working, her fingers flying over the alien device's controls. The hum grew louder, the blue light intensifying as it sensed with the core's erratic energy. Jack stood guard, his eyes scanning the chamber for any sign of movement. The creature responded almost immediately. The walls shuddered violently, and the core flared with a blinding light. Jack staggered, shielding his eyes as the tendrils came to life once more, lashing out with renewed vigor. "Rilke!" he shouted, dodging a tendril that slammed into the ground beside him. "Hurry up." "Almost there," she yelled back, her focus unwavering despite the chaos. Jack moved instinctively, slashing at the tendrils with his knife, though it was like fighting an ocean with a bucket. The tendrils seemed endless, their movements erratic and desperate. One wrapped around his leg, pulling him toward the core. He gritted his teeth, driving the blade into the fleshy appendage until it released him. The device in Rilke's hands emitted a sharp, deafening screech, and the core's light flared so brightly that Jack had to close his eyes. The creature let out a guttural roar that shook the chamber, its pain and fury palpable. "Now," Rilke screamed, grabbing Jack's arm. "Run." They bolted, the chamber collapsing around them as the core's energy spiraled out of control. The walls cracked and splintered, spewing bioluminescent liquid that sizzled and hissed as it hit the ground. The creature's roars grew fainter, its strength draining with every step they took. They burst out of the creature's body just as the ground beneath it gave way. The massive beast let out one final, anguished cry before collapsing into itself, its once mighty form reduced to a heap of lifeless flesh. Jack and Rilke stumbled away, collapsing onto the ground as the dust settled. For a moment, neither of them spoke, their breaths ragged and their bodies trembling with exhaustion. "It's over," Jack finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We did it." Rilke nodded, her glowing eyes reflecting the faint light of the alien sky. "It will not hurt anyone again." They sat in silence, the weight of their victory sinking in. For all their differences, they had survived together, their bond forged in the belly of a living nightmare. Jack glanced at Rilke, a small tired smile tugging at his lips. "So, what now?" he asked. Rilke looked at him, her expression softening. "We find way off this planet. Together." Jack chuckled, the sound light despite the heaviness of their ordeal. "Together. Yeah, I like the sound of that." As they rose to their feet and began their journey into the unknown, the remnants of the beast lay behind them, a testament to their resilience, and the beginning of an unlikely partnership that neither would ever forget.